Hello everyone, my name is Bilikis. Welcome to today's class. How are you all doing? In today's class, we'll be making a ball dress for a girl of 5 to 6. We will go with the standard measurement, but I always advise you measure your kid or whichever child you're making a dress for. But when you are into already made dresses, you go with the standard because kids varies in size and shapes. Some are plump, some are slim, some are tall, some are short, so it depends. But we'll go with the standard measurement. So quickly, let's go over the materials we'll be making use of. Now, I'm making use of this African print fabric for the upper part. So this is the actual fabric we are making use of. So this will be the lining I will use for this. So let us just set that aside. So you can decide to use two types of tool. You can decide to use a white tool. This is it. This is a white tool. So you can actually decide to make use of white, which is okay. So that means you will need a satin, a white satin to go with that, to go with the tool. Usually this is being called doll face satin, but it is satin. That's the name of the fabric. So if you are using white tool, so it goes with this white satin. So let's set that aside. This will be for embellishment like bow and all that. So let's set that aside. Then you can make use of mesh, usually called hard net, which is totally optional. But if you want more volume, you can decide to use this. So let's set that aside. You can decide to use another type of tool like this is closer to this. So you can decide to use this and then use this color of satin. Can you see that? It goes with it also. So you can choose any type of tool you want to use that is in color. That's what I'm talking about. But now, I've not yet decided which color I'm going to use, but I just need to show you how you can blend your colors together. So now we'll go over to the measurements. So now, going over the measurements. So as I've said, for a girl of 5 to 6 years. So the shoulder measurement I'll be making use of is 11 inches. So it's within the range of 10 to 11. The half of the armhole I'll be making use of is 5 inches. The bust circumference is 25. So it depends on the child. It ranges between 24 to 25. Then the waist circumference, you can use this same bust circumference as your waist circumference. But in this case, I'll use just 24. So you can just take away 1 inch from the bust circumference. But note, there are some girls that have big belly. Their belly is at times more than their chest, so you have to use that circumference. Note that. So going over to the neck width, for the neck width I'll make use of 2.5. The neck depth I'll make use of 2.5 too. Then the length of this dress is a short dress. You can decide to make it into a long dress. It depends on your preference. Here it is 30 inches. So now the nape to the waist, that is from here to here, will be 10.5 inches. It ranges between 10 to 11 from the nape of the weight of the shoulder to the waist for a 5 to 6 years old. Then the gathered part, which is from here downward, will be 19.5. So this is what the dress we are making looks like. So this upper part will be the African print. This also can be African print. Then this will be tulle, your satin, and all that will be below. So you can even make adjustments. You can decide to have a yoke over here, so you could have something like this. It depends on what you actually want. Can you see that? Sorry for my sketch. So this could be tulle. It could be any type of lace material or whatsoever. So right now, let's get to work. Now for the upper part, from the nape of the shoulder down to the waist. What I'll do now is this. I would have drafted directly on my fabric, but because of proper visibility, that is why I will have to draft on the cardboard, and I can now place this on my fabric to cut it out. First, I just have to determine the body's length. Remember I said I want it to be 10 inches, 10.5. The lowest is 10 inches, but I'll have to add extra 1 inch to it to make it 11.5. Why? Because I'll need ½ inch to join at the upper part, or 1/4 inch, while I will need ½ inch at the lower part. But I could maintain, if I would have a yoke of tulle, I could just maintain 11. Instead of 10.5, I'll maintain 11, because for the tulle, you will be taking a tiny portion of it. So just take note of that. So now I could just maintain that 11 inches. So right now my paper is on fold. Can you see? So this will be for the front and this will be for the back. Though the back will have a zipper, but I'll just cut it this way, then have the zipper allowance while cutting on the fabric. So the next thing now is to draw a straight line. I want to be sure of my measurement. So 11 is here. So be sure of your measurements. So now this will be the body's length. So the next thing now is to determine my slope. So shoulder slope for kids, first you insert 2 inches, then after the 2 inches insert 4 inches. So this is 4 inches. Then from this point just come down by 3/4 inch, which is here. Then from this point connect down here. This is what I have. Now I can insert my shoulder measurement. Half of the shoulder measurement I'm working with is 5.5, because I said it's 11. So half of 11 will be 5.5, which is here. Can you see that? So for the armhole now, I'll make use of 5. Let me just get my measurement paper so you can see that along with me. Now this is the measurement. You can see that. So I inserted 5.5 for the shoulder. So the armhole now will be 5 inches. So the 5 inches will be from this slope downward. 5 inches is here. Can you see that? So to have a straight line, just measure from the top here. So here I have, that's about 5.5. So I come here, measure that here. Draw a straight line, so that will be the chest line. Can you see that? Then I'll draw a straight line. So that will be the armhole line. So now the next thing is to insert the chest circumference. This is the, where is this chest? So this is the bust circumference. You can see that. So it is 25. So I'll just divide that by 4. So we're going quarter of that will now be 6 1/4. 6 1/4. Quarter of the bust measurement, which is here. You could add ease to it to make it like, you could add extra quarter into it if you wish, but I'll just leave it at that 6 1/4. Don't forget your seam allowance. I'll just add that all at once. So 1 inch, so that will be there. So can you see that? So for the the waist circumference, which is 24, so the quarter of that will be 6 inches. 6 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance, that will make it 7 inches. So the bust is just quarter inch more than that. What I have. Now for the armhole, just get the midpoint of this. From the slope down, that will be 2.5. So from here, just go in by 3/4 inch. Sorry, that will be 1/2 inch. I was hoping I'm drafting for an adult. So for a child, it will be 1/2 inch. So this is 1/2 inch. The next thing is to draw the armhole. This will be for the front armhole. So you see that? So that's the front, then the back now. So that's the back. Can you see the front and the back? So the next thing now is the neck width and neck depth. So for the front, I'll just leave the back at that because we can decide to change the back panel. So for the front, I want the neck depth of 2.5, neck width of 2.5. So this is 2 inches already. The remaining half will be along the slope, which is here. Then the depth, which is 2.5 to here. So you can decide to have a proper U-neck or whatever neckline you want, or a boat neck, it depends on you. So this is for the front. Can you see that? So first let me just trim this off. This. You have to cut the back armhole first. So now this is what I have. I won't cut this neck with the neck depth first. So first let me just trim off this slope. So I want to note the neck width here for the back because I'm going to be slitting it open. So that is it here. Before I finish cutting it up, I'll just note the chest line also for the back. So this will be easier for me to note, then I can finish it up. So now I'll just trim the front armhole and the neckline. So good. So let's just finish with the front. So you can decide to, as I've explained, that you can decide to have a yoke neckline here. So you have tulle here and then your African print here. So if you do that, so just from this chest line, just measure 1.5 upward. So this is 1.5. 1.5. Now draw the straight line. Let me see this. So instead of having it straight here, you could just curve it this way. That totally depends on your preference. You could just leave it straight. So it totally depends on you, on what you want. Or you could straight from the armhole connect it down to the middle this way. So it depends on whatever you want. But before you cut it out, after cutting this out, you need to write here add half an inch. Reason why? Because we have to join it together to have this basic body back again. So also note it at the lower point, add half inch before you cut it out. Now I just want to curve this part because I don't want it straight. That totally depends on your preference. So this is what I have. So now let me cut it out. So this is it. So this will be the yoke and this will be the African print fabric. So when we are cutting on our fabric, we'll add half and into both sides. So let's quickly go to the back panel. So now let me connect this. So now this is the chest line, this is the neck width. So I want this to be low. Remember, we've not added zipper allowance to this. So when you place on your fabric, you have to add the extra 1 inch for the zipper. So now for the neck depth at the back, so I'll just take it straight down to this edge. You can have it straight if you want, so you draw a straight line, or you can just have it slightly curved. So that totally depends on you. So let me just, so this is what I will have. And this is, so I'll be trimming this off. Then even you can even decide to make this straight and then you won't have this armhole at the back. So that depends on your preference. In that case, all you have to do is this, just draw a straight line this way. Can you see that? So this is what you will have. So you just trim this off and this off. That is if you want that. But let's just cut this. Then you can decide the yoke we need for this. Now I'll also trim this off because I've decided to make it straight. Then this will be the yoke. So this will be all net. So let me just cut this off. This also you will add half an inch to. both sides. And this will be up. So this will be the yoke, which will be 2, and then this. So don't forget to write add ½ inch, add half. And here zipper allowance, don't forget that. So now let me get the fabrics. Now we'll have to cut out the main fabric and the lining first. So let's just set aside the yoke and then cut this out. So for the front, the fabric has to be on fold, but this does not have to be on fold. Now I have this fabric. This is the right side and this is the wrong side. So just note that. So I'll just place it this way. This does not require seam allowance, and I'll pin it down and then cut it as per the paper. And don't forget the half seam allowance. I could just highball it, but please measure ½ inch or ¼ inch, whatever seam allowance you want to use to join to the yoke. So can you see I've added the seam allowance on the upper part. So I'm just going to cut these also for the lining. So this is the front part. I'll cut the lining, they'll go over to the back. Now for the back pattern now. So I have this folded. This is the wrong side. So this is the wrong side, so I have to note that. Remember I said we have to have the 1 inch zipper allowance. So to make that easy, what I'll do is this. From the edge, I'll just measure 1 inch. 1 inch. And draw a straight line. So can you see that? So from here now, I'll now have to place this way. So you can use a pin to pin it down, and don't forget the ½ inch you have to add here, or ¼ inch, whatever seam allowance you want to add. So I will now start cutting. So this is what I have now. Can you see that? So I've added the ½ inch and zipper allowance. Now I now have to slit this open. So this is what I have. I'll now have to cut out a lining of the size. Now we are done with the cutting of the main body. So this is for the front. So this is the lining. I had to put a very light interfacing because the lining is very light, extremely light. So I just had to add the light interfacing for stability. So this is the lining and the main fabric. So this is for the front, this is for the back. The next thing now is to go over to cut the yoke, which is this. I will use tool for that. Now I just have to cut little of the tool I will use for the lower part. So let me just place this for better visibility. And you see what I have. So you can see it better, I guess. So this will be both inside and outside, because I don't want to finish with the bias stroke or whatever, because it looks not so professional. So what I will do now is this: fold the tool this way, and you see what I've done. After that, then I'll fold it over again. So let me check if it will be okay. No, I have to fold over again. Can you see that? Because I need 2 of this front panel. So this is what I have now. Then I'll now have to place this. Make sure it starts from the fold. Then I'll have to pin it down. Remember I said add ½ inch or ¼ inch, whatever seam allowance you want. So I will just eyeball mine, then cut it this way, then this remains the same. Now after cutting it out, you can see I've added the seam allowance. When you open it up, this is what you will have. Can you see that? So this is for the front. We have 2. So we are just going to sew very tiny here all through. So let's set this aside and cut for the back. Now for the back yoke, you have to fold the same way you fold, because we need 4 pieces, 2 pieces for each side. Then I'll fold over just like I did for the other one. Then I'll place it this way. Make sure this is at the edge. Then I'll have to cut, but don't forget the ½ inch seam allowance. Now, can you see? And then the seam allowance, don't forget that. So now I have 4. So one will be this way, one will be this way. Can you see? So this is how the back will look like. So I'll just show you the overall, then we'll go over to the lower part. Now this is what it looks like. This is for the front, can you see that? And this is for the back. So this is the zipper allowance. This is how it's going to look. So now let's just set this aside and then go over to the lower part. Right now I will be explaining how to cut the tulle. Here I have 6½, but the minimum you will use is 4 yards. 4 yards is okay, but here I have 6½. So it depends on how full you want it. You could even make use of 10½, yes. So now, looking at this measurement, the gathered part, we said the upper part is 10½. So this gathered part is 19½, but it will be 20 because we need ½ inch to join to the upper part. And this tulle is by 60. The length is by 60, while the width is 6½. So now, since it's by 60, I will divide this 60 by 3. So I will have 20, 20, 20. So now this is the width. This is the length of 6½ yards. This is the width of 60. So all I have to do now is to divide. Measure 20, cut it up all down, measure 20 again, then measure the last 20. So I'm going to divide this into 3. 1, 2, 3, all through. So that is that on the tulle before we gather that. Right now, let's go over to how to cut the satin and then the lining. I told you this mesh is optional, usually called hard net, but you can add it if you like. But let's talk about the full circle flare that will be at the lower part, both the satin and the lining. Right now, I'm going over to how to cut the radius, the waist radius for the flare. Now, looking at this part, the waist circumference here is 24 inches. So now we note that. But remember, for the back we added zipper allowance 1 inch on both sides, so that will be 2 inches. So now our waist circumference will be 26 inches. That is 24 inches plus 2 inches zipper allowance. I wrote it here, plus zipper allowance. So now to calculate the waist radius for the flare, it will be 26 inches divided by 6.28, which is a standard. That will give me 4.14. So since the radius is 4.14 again, so you have to approximate it to 4.2. Now the length of the flare you want to cut with the satin and the lining. Even the mesh, you can cut it in the flare form. But if you don't have so much, you can just have a box split. So this now will be shorter than the tulle. Remember, for the tulle we said we want 20 inches because the lower part is 19.5 plus ½ inch for seam allowance. That made it 20 inches. So, but the satin and the lining, all others, has to be shorter by a minimum of 2 to 3 inches. So now I will be cutting the satin flare to be 17 inches. So that is why I have the length of flare to be 17 inches. Why? Because it has to be shorter than the tulle. So now, since we know that to be 17 inches, all we have to do is to add it to the radius, to the waist radius. So 17 inches plus 4.2, that will give us 21.2 inches. So this is the radius, why this will be the length of the flare when we added this to the initial length of the flare. Now let's get started. Remember, now for the flare we need the length of 21.2, so I'll just round that up to 22. So let me put that aside. Now to cut the flare, remember I said I rounded it up to 22. So what I'll do is this. This is the width and this is the length, which is by 62. So the type of satin I'm using is popularly called doll face satin or bridal satin, but it is satin. So now just measure 22. 22. I have 22 this way. You see that? So all I have to do is to fold this along the width. Can you see that? After doing that, I'll now measure, or you could just fold it over, but you could measure also. You measure 22 just to manage your fabric. So 22 is around here, then I'll have to fold over this way. Can you see? So what I will do now is to cut this off, then fold it again for you to understand better. Now I've trimmed it off. So to explain again, remember I said I rounded it up to 22. So just measure 22 from the edge. So this is 22 I have here. So I folded it along the width. Can you see that? Then here I have 44. So double the 22. I have that here. So here I have 44. Can you see that? So I folded this way. Then I folded again. So this is what I have. Then now I can insert my radius on this. So this is what I will have. So it's time to insert our radius. Now our radius is starting with our radius. Our waist radius is 4.2. So we start with that from here. So all I'll do now is to measure from the edge 4.2. 4.2. Then I'll keep rotating it. 4.2. So going over it again for visibility. So you measure 4.2 from the edge this way. 4.2, and then you mark with your chalk. So I've marked mine. So this is what I have. So this is it, 4.2 all through. Then because you don't want to have excess, so as I've said, because you don't want to have excess, what you now do now is to go up by half an inch. Half an inch. Can you see that all through? So by the time you attach this, you have your actual waist measurements. So now, so this is the seam allowance. So by the time you cut this, so when you sew this, this will be your actual waist measurements of the 26 inches. But you have to cut here. So by the time you sew this half an inch seam allowance, so you have this actual waist measurement. So having done that, let's go to the calculated length of flare, which is 21.5. 21.2, sorry about that. 21.2. So 21.2 is here. So I'll keep rotating it. 21.2. Make sure your measuring tape is at the edge. So that is what I have. Then I can connect. I'm marking on the wrong side because of the type of chalk I'm using. But this is a tutorial. What matters is visibility for the class. So can you see what I have now? So first I'll have to cut this off. Now this is off, the lower part is off, so now I have to cut this on the added seam allowance. So looking at it now, I have a full flare. So this is what it will look like. Can you see that? Isn't that beautiful? So now we have to open one side because of the zipper allowance, but because I want to use this to cut out my lining, And then let me go over the mesh again. So I want to use this as a pattern to cut out the lining, so I'll just fold it away before I start cutting. So there are two ways you can insert this netting under your dress. You can either box split it or cut it in a circular form like this. So if you are cutting it in a circular form, you just fold the same way I folded for this. But if you want to box split it, that would be straight. So those are the two ways. This circle sleeve is easier. So let me just use this method so that you understand this method too. So what I'll do now is to cut out 17 inches first, then we'll start pleating. Now this is the mesh. Can you see that? So remember, for the tool we are using for this, we made it 20 inches. Then for this satin, I made it 17 inches. Then this one also will be shorter, so I made this 15 inches. Let me show you. So I have 15 inches. Can you see that? So I'm going to trim off the edge. So that is 15 inches for this. So it is shorter. The tool is 20 inches. The satin is 17. I made this 15 inches. So the lining will be like 16. Because it has to cover this, because you don't want it to touch the skin of the girl. So now to fold it, you just fold it randomly, because all you want to achieve is this volume. So you can just split as 3 inches interval. Can you see that? Then I'm just putting it down. Can you see that? Then I'll pleat again until I achieve 26 inches. I've sewn the mesh. Can you see? I pleated it up. So here, so I have the box split here. So let's just leave that. So looking at it, you see it has more volume. So it will add volume to a outfit. So I've trimmed it off, and now I have 15 inches. So looking at it, I have 15 inches from the edge. The reason why I made it shorter is because it shouldn't show beneath the satin. So for the satin, I made it because I already cut out the lining. So this is the lining, and you see that this is the satin. So I cut it out in full flare, just the way I cut out the satin. So this is what I have now. The tool, we will go back to this because I've cut it out. The tool is 20. I want you to understand the length of what I used all through. Let me just take a part of the tool. So this is the tool. It's already cut out. So here, this is one. So here I have 20. So remember, the length of the tool is 20 inches, though it was 19 and a half, but we made it 20 because of seam allowance. So the next one now is the satin. I made that 17 inches because it should be a little bit shorter than the tool. You don't want it coming out, so that was why I reduced it to 17 inches. So then again, I made the lining 16. So this is 17, the tool is 20, the satin is 17, the lining, I made it 16. Now the mesh is 15. Going over it again, the tool is 20, satin is 17, the lining is 16, while the mesh is 15 inches. So let me just set all this aside. We'll go over to the tool. Okay, so now it has been cut out. Remember I told you I have 6.5. You could go as much as 10 yards of fabric, of tulle, sorry. So this is what I have. So now remember the way I told you to cut it out. So this is 1, 2, 3. So we cut this out by the that was by the width, because it's 60, so I cut it out 20, 20, 20. So that is why I have 3 here, but the length still remain 16. Sorry, the width still remain 6.5 yards, while the length is 20. So what we have to do now is to gather. Now there are 2 ways you can gather these two. One, you can either gather it separately. Remember we have 3 of the same length and the same width. So you can either gather it separately, gather this, gather this, gather this. If you do it that way, you achieve more volume. But if you don't want to stress yourself, you could just attach it together. 1, 2, 3. Then what do? You gather it all together. So that is totally your preference. So but I will just do mine separately. 1, 2, 3. So I'll take to my sewing machine and show you how to do it. Looking at it, you can see I've gathered it all. So this is 1, 2, 3. You can decide to just gather it together as I've shown you. I just like to go for this option because it adds more volume to it. So let me just turn it the other way around for you to get a clearer picture. Can you see that? This is going to be massively beautiful. So this is what I have, and I've gathered it to 26, which is with the seam allowance, the zipper allowance included. 26. Okay, that's good. That's correct. 26. So by the time you want to attach, just make sure the edge is like 1 inch straight because of the zipper allowance. So now another option you could do is to just sew it together. So 1, 2, 3. So you just sew half an inch together all through. But if you had gathered it together, it will save you the stress of what I'm about to do. So let me just do that before we cut the upper peplum with the African print fabric. Now this is what it looks like. Can you see it's so beautiful already? So it's full. That's why I like the method of 1, 1, 1. So now let's just set this aside, and then now I'll cut the peplum for the upper part. Over the waist radius for the one we use for the satin and the lining. So our waist radius was 4.2 inches. But in this case, you just add extra 2 inches to it just to give it a little bit of volume, so that by the time you gather it, the tool underneath will be more relaxed and still have that puffy effect, rather than just making use of this same measurement. So now I'll be making use of 6.2 or 6.5, or just approximate it to 6 inches. Then I want the length of the peplum to be 5.5 with seam allowance included, because I just want little of it. So now it will be 6 inches by 5.5. So now let's go over it. Now for the radius, I'll just make use of 6 inches, because I'll have to gather it. 6 inches. Now I have the radius. For the length of the peplum, remember I told you 5.5 with seam allowance inclusive. So what I'll do now is to add that 5.5 to 6 inches, which will give me 11 inches. 11.5, sorry, 11.5. That was 11.5. So 11.5. And I'll keep rotating it to get my circle. Now this is what I have. First I will have to cut this and this. So this is what I have. You see that? I'll just slip it. This part alone. So this I will have to gather it to 26, also then hem the lower part. Why doing that of the peplum? I just want to let you know that you have to cut one side of this open, both for the lining and for the satin. This has been gathered. Can you see how it looks? I've hemmed the lower parts. So I'll just set everything aside. The satin, I just use a serger to finish the edge, and both for the lining. Right now, let's start sewing. We have to start sewing the yoke first. So what do? This is for the back, this is for the front. So I have to join both at the shoulder. So let me just put this aside, then this aside. So I will now have to join them at the shoulder. Can you see that? And when you are sewing, just sew a very tiny stitch. Don't take much seam allowance, just little. Can you see that? So I'll take to the sewing machine and then sew the shoulder for both sides and then show you. I've sewn the shoulders. Can you see that? Looking at it. So the next thing is to make right sides face each other. What do I do next? I just take to the sewing machine again to sew the neckline right from the back to the front, and hem here. Also sew the armhole. Looking at it now, I've sewn the neckline and the armhole area. But now what will I do? I'll make sure I trim this a little bit. I'll trim it. Also the armhole, I will trim it a little bit before I just bring it out from this front panel. I haven't trimmed it off, then I can bring it out. So can you see that? So this is what it will look like. So I'll bring out the other one also from this front panel. Now I've torn it. Can you see? I just slightly pressed it. Please, a lukewarm iron. Can you see what it looks like? So what we'll now do is to set this aside and go over to the main bodies. Now to the main bodies, I just want to add some beauty to it, so I decided to cut out a plain material. This is taffeta, so I just cut out two. Looking at it, you see I took the shape of the upper part of the bodies. Can you see that? So I just cut out two pieces. Then you can make it 1.5 or 1 inch depending on how wide you want it to be. So I cut out two and then use a very light interfacing to just make it stable. So how do I sew it now? Since it's going to be like this on the fabric, can you see that? So I'll have to sew this lower part, because this I'll have to sew it along with the lining. So all you have to do is to place it right sides facing each other now, then take to the sewing machine to sew this lower part. Now it's been sewn, and then I notched it a little. Then all you have to do is to turn it. So let me just turn it with my pressing iron and then show you. Now I've turned it. Can you see? So the seam line is more on the inside. So this is how it will look on the fabric. So what I will now do is to take to my sewing machine to sew this, not to the lining but to the main fabric. Make sure you set it so well, pin it down, and then just a tiny stitch here before we add in the net and lining. This is what I have after joining it together. Can you see it's beautiful? So the next thing now is to open up the lining too, because we have to fix in this tool in it. So what do? You just have to place it this way. So you have to work with your pin. You know, have to make it like this. Make sure you get the center point before attaching it. So I will just pin that down. So we are working with the front panel because this is the front bodies and this is the front side of the yoke. So after doing that, then I'll have to place this way. Hope you see that very well. So right now I'll now have to pin it down, then show you how it looks. Now I've pinned it down. So make sure the midpoint of the tool aligns with the bodies. So I have to mark it with a chalk, then pin it down. So to make you understand more, I'll have to sew this first before attaching my lining this way. Now I've sewn it. Can you see? So looking at it, you can see it's so beautiful. The next thing now is to place the lining on it this way. Then I will sew the seam allowance. Now I've sewn it. After sewing it, I have to top stitch. That is all the seam allowance towards the lining, then just sew it down. So this is what it now looks on the right side. So I'll have to iron this down before we proceed to the back. This is what we have. Can you see it's so beautiful? Then on the wrong side you have this. Now let's go to the back panel. For the back now, what I'll do is this. Let me just move this aside. So this is the upper part and this is the lower part. This is the waist area. So what I'll do to know where to place this is this. I'll just measure the 1 inch for the zipper allowance, which is here. I'll do the same for this on the main fabric. So that's here. So what do I do now? I'll take this. So this has to match with this. So what I'll do is this. Turn it this way. So it has to match with the place I marked. Also with this. Hope you can see that. Then this will be on the, so the waist area goes down here. So I will have to attach it, noting the 1 inch for the zipper, then match this also, and you see I will have to pin it down and then sew it together. Now I've sewn it. So looking at it, this was the 1 inch zipper allowance I marked, so I started sewing from there. So let me just move the camera closer. So looking at it, this will be for the zipper because I want to have an invisible closing for the dress. So hopefully neat up you can see this is the neck depth of the back panel. Can you see that? And this part is open for the zipper, the 1 inch zipper allowance. But I started sewing from there till the end. Can you see that? So this is what I will have. Can you see that? So I can also top stitch the same way I did for the front. So I'll just do that, give it a good press and show you. Looking at it, this is what it looks like. So this is it. The next thing now is for us to sew the side. Can you see the way I open up this side, then the front? Can you see that? Make this match. Then we now have to sew the 1 inch all down. So from the lining straight down to the main bodies. Now this is it. I've sewn the sides. So when I open it up, this is what I will have. You see that? So I'll just have to press it, then show you how it looks. Looking at it, this is what we have after ironing. This is the back panel. You can see it looks beautiful already. Now let's go to the lower part. Now for the lower part, we have the tulle, we have the satin, we have the lining, we have the mesh, and then we have this gathered peplum. So it will be divided into two. This mesh, the hard net, and the lining goes together. This will be attached to the lining of the dress. While this satin with this gathered peplum with the tulle will be attached together. Let me go over that again. So now this is the right side of the tulle. This will be on it. It will be this way. Can you see that? While this satin will be underneath the tulle. So this is what we have, the satin, the tulle, can you see? Then this gathered peplum. This will be together, will be attached together to the main fabric of the dress. While this, the hard net will be on the lining. So this is the lining. So this will be the innermost part, touching the skin of the girl. So this is what we have attached to the lining, while this will be attached to the main fabric, so we don't have it this way. Can you see that? So let's start. To make it easier, I'll take to my sewing machine the peplum, the gathered peplum, the net, and the satin. I will sew it together to have it in one piece. Then the mesh on the lining. The mesh will be on the lining. So let me sew it and show you. Looking at it, this is what I have. Can you see that? This is it on the other side. Can you see that? So this is the lining and the mesh. Can you see? So now this will be attached to the main fabric. But I just decided, because since this lower part is white, I will just have to add white ribbon to this part. Let me just show you that, so it will, like, you know, bring out the beauty of the waist area. So the ribbon will be like this. Can you see that? So what I'll do is this. I can use hemming gum to just glue it to it, but I'll just have to loosen this part a little bit since I changed my mind, so as to sew it inward. But it is optional. You might not do that, but I just feel I should do that to add to the beauty. Now to attach the lower part to the upper part. Let me make it face this way so you could see. So now I'll have to attach it this way. This is the main fabric. So I need to make do with this. I'll just open this up. Can you see that? So right side facing right side. So you have to get the midpoint of the main bodies, then attach the midpoint of the lower part, and then I have to sew it all down. Can you see that? I have to sew it to the main fabric, not the lining. Can you see right side facing the right side of the skirt? Can you see that? So I will sew it, then show you. Can you see this? Isn't this beautiful? Oh my god. So after attaching it, this is what it looks like. This is the back panel. So let me just move the camera closer, then we finish it up. So we only attach that to the main fabric. So right now we will attach this to the lining before we fix in our zipper. How do we do that? You should make sure this net goes inward. As I've said, the net has to go inward. So what do? The right side of the lining will have to face the right side of the lining of the main fabric. So I'll just flip it this way. So I'll start sewing from the edge. Can you see that? So I'm going to sew it this way. So after sewing it, it will be like this. So let me just sew it and show you. Now the net has been added with the lining and the volume has increased. So can you see the inner side? So let me just open it for you to see. Let me move the cameras closer. Can you see that? So this is what we have. Can you see? So I attach this to the lining, while this to the main fabric. So the next thing is to attach our zipper. Make sure you use a matching zipper, and let's do that. For the zipper, I'll be using a open and closed zipper, but it depends on your preference. You can use an invisible zipper. It totally depends on your preference. But the reason why I like this is that it helps me work very well around the fabric and the lining to have that perfect and invisible look. So what I'll do now is I'll cut the required length, because I'm using this for a child's dress. So I'm going to cut the required length, but make sure this is down before you cut that. So after cutting that, I will attach it, and this lovely bow will be added to it. Now the zipper has been added. Can you see that? So this is what it looks like. So I will now turn it to the wrong side to talk about some tips. Then for the bow, there are two ways you can do that. All you have to do is this. Let me just close the zipper. So after closing the zipper, what you do is to attach the bow to just a side. Like this is the zipper. You either attach it to very close to the zipper or here, or better still, just use a press button so you can stick it to it, then remove anytime you feel like. So now let me turn to the wrong side so that we can talk about some tips. This is what the inside looks like. It is advisable you use the same lining for both the upper part and the lower part, but this is a tutorial. I always go for something contrast for better visibility and understanding, because when you're looking at this, you will know this is the upper part, this is the lower part. Now you can decide not to add this mesh to it. It is optional, as I've said in the beginning of the video. So if you are not adding this to it, so the lining is not required. So what will now be your lining? This satin will now be your lining. So the same way we attach this to the upper part lining, you will now have to attach this satin to it. That is if you are not making use of the mesh or hard net as it is popularly called. So that will not be required. But if you want more volume, you can just do it the same way I did this. But if you don't want to have this, there won't be need for the lining. So this satin will be the lining. So you add only the tulle to the main fabric, while the satin to the lining of the bodies. So now to secure this very well, because looking at it, when we join it, you can see the difference. This is the main fabric with the lining, with the satin and the tulle, while this is the net or mesh with the lining. So all you have to do is to just pick it up this way, close it up and tack it down. Tack it in the front, the side, and somewhere around the back, so it secures. So even when you open it up, it won't be opening. So that is a great idea. So I'll just add the bow now to show you the final look. You can see it's so beautiful and very easy to make. I'll just give it a good press and then show you. Now this is the result of the outfit. Can you see it's so beautiful? And oh my god, it's so nice. Just try to make this for Yoke. So beautiful. Hope this tutorial has been helpful. If you have any question, just drop it in the group. Bye.